Some secrets don't want to be found. They lie in wait, not in books or on maps, but behind old walls, under floorboards, sealed in places where no light dares to go. And sometimes it takes a moment of reckless courage to break through the silence and uncover what others worked so hard to hide. That moment came when Pastor Elijah Carter, still shaken from the discovery of Miriam Quill's diary, realized something chilling. The rituals she described weren't ancient history. They were still happening. He returned to the church in Elk Point, the same church where he had been sent to preach, the same church where dozens of families once gathered to sing hymns, unaware of what hid beneath their feet. The building was beautiful on the outside. White clapboard siding, a tall steeple, a bell that hadn't rung in years, but Pastor Elijah noticed something odd. An iron ring bolted into the stone behind the pulpit, concealed beneath a dusty old rug. When he pulled the rug back, he discovered a trapdoor, rusted, padlocked, hidden in plain sight. At first, he hesitated. That's what fear does. It makes you doubt what you already know. But fear wasn't going to stop him, not after what he'd read. Not after the stories Miriam had written in blood and ink, with the help of Samuel, a brave 17-year-old whose older brother had mysteriously vanished 3 winters before they broke the lock. Together, they descended the narrow steps into the cold earth below the church. The air was damp, the smell metallic and sour, hit them like a wall. What they found wasn't a basement, it was a butchering room. Stone walls, an altar carved with symbols not found in any Bible, heavy iron chains bolted into the foundation, clay masks lined the far wall, each one etched with a different name. Many of those names matched the ones in Miriam's diary. And the town's lost families. There were cages, child-sized cages. Samuel fell to his knees when he saw them. One cage had scratch marks on the inside, deep ones. On a wooden table, stained dark from decades of use, sat what looked like ceremonial tools, knives, branding irons, and a bowl filled with a hardened black substance that neither of them wanted to touch. But the worst part was the writing on the wall. Etched in jagged stone, barely illuminated by the flickering lantern, were the words, "Only the flesh of the chosen preserves the blood of the blessed." It was a direct quote from Miriam's diary, word for word. Proof that what she wrote wasn't a hallucination or fear-fueled fiction. The rituals were real. The cult, the Order of the Hollow Flesh, had used this sacred church as a mask, a perfect front. While the town came to pray upstairs, the screams of the innocent were swallowed by stone beneath them. Samuel, trembling, whispered, "My brother, this is where they took him." It wasn't just a hidden room. It was a crime scene soaked in generations of silence, and Pastor Elijah knew this was only one piece of the puzzle, because if one church had a chamber like this, others might too. This discovery could not be dismissed as folklore anymore. There were physical remnants, ritual tools, carvings, artifacts. They sealed the room and photographed everything. Elijah sent reports to journalists, to state historians, and to authorities. Most were ignored. But some listened. A few brave souls began investigating other small towns with similar patterns. Missing children, sudden family disappearances, abandoned churches. The terrible secret wasn't just that the room existed. It was that so many knew and said nothing. Elders in the town had been warned never to speak of it. Old-timers who'd long since passed had carried the truth to their graves, and those who had tried to expose it silenced, discredited, or simply disappeared. This hidden room represented a legacy of evil that wore a holy mask, and it reminded everyone involved that monsters don't always hide in shadows. They often stand in pulpits, smile at neighbors, and quote scripture. Because when truth is hidden beneath sacred places, it becomes even more dangerous, and until someone opens the door, that evil remains free to return. So let this story remind you, when you sense something is wrong, don't ignore it. Dig deeper, open the door, even if what you find is terrifying. At least it will no longer be hidden. Not every story ends in tragedy, some end in survival. But survival has its cost: silence, exile, and generations spent looking over your shoulder, praying the past doesn't find you. In the case of Miriam Quill, the woman whose secret diary exposed a cannibal cult operating under the guise of religion, her legacy didn't die with her final written words. It lived on not in history books, but in a hidden bloodline that carried both her truth and her trauma through the generations. For decades, the world believed Miriam had perished. After she risked everything to poison the ceremonial wine of the Order of the Hollow Flesh and expose their crimes, her name vanished from every record, no grave, no obituary, not even a whisper. But darkness doesn't erase the blood it spills. It leaves trails, and sometimes the truth finds a way to resurface, through the one thing no cult, no ritual, no masked horror can fully extinguish: family. In 2005, over a century later, while researching genealogical inconsistencies tied to families from Elk Point, a historical researcher named Margaret Bell stumbled upon an elderly woman living in Iowa under the name Rose Denham. She was 93 years old, frail, sharp-eyed, and had no official records prior to 1940, no marriage license, no birth certificate, nothing. Yet when Margaret asked about Elk Point, something in Rose's expression changed. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. After 2 weeks of cautious conversation, Rose invited Margaret into her living room. What she pulled from a locked wooden chest would make historians weep. Inside were original pages from Miriam Quill's diary, wrapped in cloth and preserved with care. Pages that had never been seen before, stories of her escape, of 2 children she freed, and of the night she watched the church burn as she fled into the woods with nothing but her blood-soaked dress and a promise never to return. Rose, it turned out, was Miriam's granddaughter. Born under a different name in a different state, Rose had lived her entire life in hiding, raised with one rule: never let them find you. Her mother, Miriam's daughter, had died young, and Rose had been passed between caretakers who knew enough to stay quiet, but not enough to understand what they were protecting. All she had were Miriam's writings, her warnings, and the belief that the order wasn't truly dead. It had only scattered, morphing into new identities, moving into different towns, and even embedding itself into places of influence. Miriam's plan to destroy the cult had worked, but not completely. Half its members died during the poisoned ritual. The rest vanished into the shadows, rebranding themselves, changing surnames, starting new families to protect their legacy. And Miriam? She became a ghost, watching from afar as history erased her name and glorified those who deserved to be exposed. Rose carried that weight her whole life, never marrying, never having children, never staying too long in one place. "I didn't want to leave a trail," she said, "and I didn't want to give them a reason to come looking for me." But despite her isolation, she never stopped remembering. She never stopped honoring her grandmother's bravery. She never stopped believing that the world deserved to know the truth, not just about the cult, but about the cost of survival, because surviving evil doesn't mean it ends. It means you carry the burden of what others didn't live to tell. Rose didn't speak out for attention. She did it because she believed silence is where evil grows best. Her testimony, combined with Miriam's original pages, changed everything. It reignited the investigation into Elk Point, helped verify Pastor Elijah Carter's claims, and even traced several families from the original order now living under new identities in different parts of the country. But perhaps more importantly, it revealed that one woman's courage can echo for generations. The bloodline of a survivor is not marked by power or wealth or fame. It is marked by resilience, truth, and the willingness to carry the weight of the past so that others don't have to. Rose Denham never wanted to be remembered, but now she is, not as a victim, not as a forgotten name, but as the final breath of a story that refused to be buried, and her message to the world was simple: we are the proof that they didn't win. Let that remind us, survival isn't just living through something, it's speaking when others went silent, it's remembering when the world forgets, and it's standing tall, knowing your blood carries a story that can't be erased. Some disappearances are loud, screaming headlines, search parties, the nation watching. Others fade quietly, family by family, name by name, until there is no one left to remember they even existed. In the wake of Miriam Quill's recovered diary and the discovery of the ritual chamber beneath the Elk Point Church, a chilling pattern began to emerge. one that no one had seen clearly before, perhaps because no one dared to look. This was more than just a story of cannibal cults and secret rituals. It was about bloodlines, and more specifically, why some bloodlines simply vanished. Historians and genealogists, now with Miriam's documentation in hand, started cross-referencing the names listed in her account of the Order of the Hollow Flesh. She had listed 15 families, each described as either victims or carefully targeted sources for ritual sacrifice. Families that were considered untainted, spiritually pure, or blessed by heritage, according to the Order's twisted doctrine. Researchers pulled census records, marriage certificates, property deeds, and gravestone etchings. And what they found was more disturbing than any one murder or missing person case. These families, once vibrant, established, and deeply rooted in the community, were gone, not just moved away, erased. Entire family trees had gone barren, no marriages, no children, no records after a certain year. One family's lineage ended with a mysterious house fire in 1904. Another ended with an influenza outbreak, yet no death certificates were filed. And in some cases, names just stopped appearing altogether, like someone had decided the line no longer needed to exist. How does that happen? How do entire bloodlines just vanish? The truth is, some didn't vanish naturally. They were chosen, hunted. The Order didn't just kill to preserve their own. They killed to eliminate legacies that threatened their doctrine. These weren't random acts of violence. They were strategic. Ritualistic, designed not only to take life but to end entire generational lines, because if the Order believed your family's blood was powerful, but outside the cult, they believed it had to be consumed or destroyed. And what makes this even more terrifying, in every generation they succeeded. These families didn't just lose loved ones, they lost their past, and when the past dies, so does the future. No history, no descendants, no one left to ask questions. This is the danger of secrets carried through time. They don't just steal people, they steal memory, and in doing so, they erase accountability. Imagine being a child in the 1950s, growing up in a town built over the ruins of Elk Point, never knowing your great-grandfather was one of those who vanished, never knowing your surname was changed to hide from a curse, or worse, from a crime. You'd have no idea why your family was so fractured, why the stories at the dinner table stopped at a certain point, why your elders said things like, "We don't talk about the ones who came before." That wasn't just superstition. That was survival. Now, what about the families that did survive? Some of them changed their names. Some joined the cult to protect themselves. Some vanished so effectively that today, their DNA is floating through our blood banks and ancestry tests with no traceable roots. And then there were the others, those who thrived after the disappearances, moved into wealth, power, politics. Researchers noted that in some cases, descendants of the Order, those who had allegedly taken part in the rituals, went on to become judges, business owners, even lawmen. And with every promotion, the past got a little darker and a little quieter. This isn't about conspiracy theories. It's about recognizing that the patterns of history are often more intentional than we'd like to admit. And when evil targets bloodlines, not just individuals, it's playing a longer game, a generational game, a legacy game. We often say the dead can't speak, but they do through records, journals, and sometimes through their very absence. A vanishing bloodline is not just a genealogical mystery, it is a message, a red flag, a tombstone with no name, but a story that still matters. We must become the generation that asks why certain families disappear while others rise. Why some names are erased from history while others are protected, and why the truth is so often buried under decades of silence. Because if we don't ask, we risk becoming the next forgotten branch on someone else's family tree. So ask, research, remember, because sometimes the only way to stop evil from returning is to trace the blood it tried to erase. History doesn't whisper forever, eventually it screams. And if we refuse to listen, if we dismiss the past as myth, ignore the patterns, silence the survivors, we don't just risk repeating history, we invite it back in. The story of the Order of the Hollow Flesh, the ritualistic cult that quietly stole lives and erased bloodlines beneath the mask of religion, is not just a horror tale set in the 1800s. It's a blueprint of silence, of how evil survives by hiding in plain sight, waiting for generations too distracted, too comfortable, or too afraid to look closer. And that is the real warning for our time. Because the signs didn't disappear, they just changed shape. You see, evil doesn't always wear cloaks and chant in the woods anymore. Today, it wears suits. It speaks in politically correct tones. It hides behind polished platforms, smiling selfies, and good public relations. It uses power, not pitchforks, but the patterns are the same. Disappearances that go unsolved, communities that don't talk about that part of town, institutions that protect reputations over truth. Histories that are scrubbed, rewritten, or erased entirely, and still, we look away. We convince ourselves that it's not like that anymore, that stories like Miriam Quill's are too far-fetched, that families don't just vanish, that's all superstition, rumor, folklore. But what if it's not? What if, right now, in some small corner of America, there's a church with a locked basement that no one's entered in 80 years? What if a family name was changed just 3 generations ago, not because of immigration, but because they were running from something? And what if the same kind of rituals, perhaps spiritual, psychological, or ideological rather than physical, are still being carried out, not to worship darkness, but to preserve control, because that's what it's always been about, power. Silence, blood, and legacy, the warning for our time is simple yet urgent. If we don't confront buried truth, it will eventually confront us, louder, darker, and more dangerous than before. We live in a world obsessed with appearance, where the past is filtered through whatever makes people feel safest. But comfort is not the same as clarity. We cannot heal what we refuse to see. We cannot prevent what we won't even acknowledge. The order of the hollow flesh may no longer exist in name, but what it represented, the spiritual rot, the manipulation of belief to justify unthinkable acts, the hunger to purify society by eliminating unworthy bloodlines. That spirit still lingers. It lingers in extremism, in cults with new branding, in generational trauma no one wants to name, in institutions that protect predators instead of exposing them, in our fear of asking the hard questions. Elijah Carter warned us over 100 years ago. Rose Denham risked everything to tell her family's story, and Miriam Quill died trying to stop the cycle. So now the question is, what will we do with their warning? Will we scroll past it? Will we call it fiction? Will we wait until something breaks through our walls before we finally believe the threat is real? Or will we start listening before it's too late? Because every generation gets tested, every era faces its moment when silence is no longer an option and the truth is no longer a luxury but a weapon. This is ours. We can choose to be the generation that digs deeper, that reclaims erased history, that honors the survivors not just with applause, but with action. We must stop thinking the fight against darkness belongs to another time. Because the darkness never left, it just got better at hiding. Evil adapts, truth endures, but only if we protect it. This is your call, not just to remember, but to investigate, not just to mourn, but to speak. Not just to survive, but to expose, because if the past has taught us anything, it's this: what we bury in silence today becomes someone else's nightmare tomorrow. Let that be the warning for our time. Let us be the ones who break the cycle.